My lungs were burning. Not from exertion, but from breathing air so cold it felt like swallowing glass shards. The snow under my boots made that specific crunching sound, the kind that only happens at 40 below zero, when ice crystals are so frozen they shatter instead of compress. I was running, though I couldn't remember when I'd started. Behind me, something was walking. Not running. Walking. And that was somehow worse. The footsteps didn't sound right. They were too heavy, landing with a weight that suggested something massive, but they came too quickly, covering ground that should have been impossible. Between each step, there was this wet, clicking sound, like joints popping, like bones scraping against each other without cartilage to cushion them. My headlamp beam bounced wildly across the trees, and every shadow looked like it was reaching for me. We thought we were the hunters. That illusion lasted exactly 3 nights. My name is David Chen, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in those woods. I was not the kind of person who believed in monsters. I believed in bad coffee, government incompetence, and bears. Lots of bears. I'd spent 6 years working as a freelance documentarian, covering everything from illegal logging operations in Washington to conspiracy theorists in Nevada. I'd interviewed people who swore they'd been abducted by aliens, people who claimed to have evidence of Bigfoot, people who thought the government was controlling the weather. I listened to all of them with the same polite skepticism, nodded in the right places, and went home thinking about my next paycheck. Wendigos were not on that list. Wendigos were folklore for tourists, the kind of thing you'd find on a coffee mug in a gift shop next to dream catchers and plastic tomahawks. Native American legend, sure, but legend nonetheless. A cautionary tale about the dangers of winter and starvation, wrapped up in supernatural packaging to make it more memorable. I thought I understood the metaphor. I thought I was smart enough to see through the mythology. I was wrong about a lot of things. This isn't a story about finding the Wendigo. This is a story about what happens when you go looking for something that was never lost. When you shine a light into a darkness that's been left alone for a reason. When you take a myth that survived for thousands of years and decide, in your infinite modern arrogance, that you're going to prove it wrong. The moment we went looking for it, something woke up. And once it woke up, it started paying attention. And once it started paying attention, we stopped being documentary filmmakers and became something much simpler. We became food. The Wendigo comes from the Algonquian-speaking peoples of the northern forests, stretching from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Rocky Mountains. If you ask 10 different elders from 10 different tribes, you'll get 10 different descriptions, but certain elements remain consistent. It's associated with winter, with famine, with the absolute worst things humans can do to survive. The word itself roughly translates to the evil spirit that devours mankind, though some linguists argue it means one who lives alone, which might actually be more terrifying when you think about it. The classic description goes something like this: a creature that was once human but became something else through an act of cannibalism. Not just any cannibalism, mind you, but specifically eating human flesh during a winter so harsh that it twisted something fundamental in the person's soul. After that first taste, they couldn't stop. The hunger never ended. In fact, it got worse. The more they ate, the hungrier they became. Their body changed to match their appetite, growing taller and thinner, their skin stretching tight over bones that kept elongating, their eyes sinking back into their skull, their lips pulling back from teeth that seemed too large for their face. Some versions say they grow to 15 feet tall. Some say 20. Some say they never stop growing at all. But here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting I mean deeply unsettling. Some say it's a creature, a physical monster that hunts through the winter woods. Others say it's what happens when a human survives too long in conditions that should have killed them, when the will to live overrides every other moral constraint. It's not a monster that attacks you. It's a monster you become. And once you become it, you bring winter with you wherever you go. Your presence makes the temperature drop, makes food spoil, makes other people hungry even when they've just eaten. You're a walking famine, a supernatural embodiment of starvation. The Wendigo psychosis was actually a recognized condition in early 20th century psychiatric literature. There are documented cases of individuals, almost always during harsh winters in remote locations, becoming convinced they were transforming into Wendigos. They'd report an insatiable hunger, even after eating. They'd report their body feeling wrong, stretched, too thin. They'd report an overwhelming urge to consume human flesh. Some of these cases resulted in actual cannibalism. Others resulted in the afflicted person begging their family to kill them before they hurt someone. There's a case from 1878 about a Cree trapper named Swift Runner who killed and ate his entire family during a winter near Fort Saskatchewan. When they found him, he claimed a Wendigo spirit had possessed him. He was executed, but the story didn't die with him. There's another case from 1907, a man named Jack Fiddler, who was both a shaman and a self-proclaimed Wendigo hunter. He claimed to have killed 14 Wendigos over his lifetime. The Canadian authorities called it murder. Jack Fiddler called it protection. He died in custody before his trial ended, though whether it was suicide or something else depends on who you ask. Funny how every myth seems to come with police reports. The Algonquian peoples took the Wendigo seriously enough that they had specific protocols for dealing with it. You didn't hunt it. You didn't seek it out. You didn't even speak its name during certain times of the year. If you suspected someone was transforming, you either left the area immediately or you dealt with the problem in a permanent way. There was no cure. There was no rehabilitation. Once the hunger started, it never stopped. And there was one rule that everyone agreed on, regardless of which tribe you asked or which version of the story you heard. You never, ever went looking for a Wendigo on purpose. Because the act of looking, the act of seeking it out, was itself a kind of invitation. It was a way of telling the universe that you didn't respect the boundary between the human world and whatever realm the Wendigo inhabited. That rule exists for a reason. We learned it the hard way. The project started the way most bad ideas start, with money and ego in roughly equal proportions. It was October 2018, and I was in a coffee shop in Portland, staring at my bank account and trying to figure out how I was going to make rent for the third consecutive month. My phone buzzed. Email from someone named Ethan Rourke. The subject line read, "Documentary opportunity, serious inquiries only." I almost deleted it. I'd gotten dozens of emails like that over the years, usually from people who wanted to pay me an exposure or expected me to fund the entire project myself while they took credit. But something made me open it. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity. Probably both. Ethan's pitch was straightforward. He was putting together a documentary crew to investigate the Wendigo legend in northern Ontario. He had funding, he had equipment, he had permits to film in restricted Indigenous territories, and he had contacts who claimed to know where recent sightings had occurred. He needed someone with documentary experience who wasn't going to get squeamish if things got weird. The pay was $15,000 for 6 weeks of work, all expenses covered, plus a percentage of any streaming deal we landed. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why he needed someone like me instead of a more established filmmaker. I should have been suspicious of the money. Instead, I replied within an hour. We met 2 weeks later at a hotel conference room in Toronto. Ethan was exactly what I expected, early 40s, expensive outdoor gear that had never seen actual outdoor use, the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly wrong about anything important. He'd made his money in tech, sold a startup for an amount he described as comfortable, and decided to pursue his real passion, which was apparently proving that cryptids were real. He'd already done expeditions looking for Bigfoot in Washington and the Chupacabra in Texas. Both had produced documentaries that got picked up by streaming services. Both had made modest profits. He was convinced the Wendigo would be his breakout hit. The rest of the team was already there. Mark Sutherland was our survival expert, a former Army Ranger who'd spent the last decade leading wilderness tours in Alaska. He had the look of someone who'd spent too much time in places where nature was actively trying to kill him, weathered skin, economy of movement, eyes that were always calculating distances and exits. He didn't talk much during the meeting, just nodded when Ethan outlined the plan. Lena Fournier was our cultural consultant, an anthropologist from McGill University who specialized in indigenous North American folklore. She was Metis, with family connections to several Algonquian communities, though she made it clear early on that just because she was helping us didn't mean her relatives approved. In fact, most of them had explicitly told her not to go. She went anyway, partly because the university was funding her participation as research, partly because she wanted to document our inevitable failure. She had a dry sense of humor about the whole thing, treating it like an academic exercise rather than a genuine expedition. Tom Pacheco was our videographer, and he was the only one besides me who seemed to understand how ridiculous this all was. He'd worked on nature documentaries for the BBC, filmed in places that made Northern Ontario look like a vacation resort. He had a sarcastic comment for everything and treated the whole expedition like a very well-paid camping trip. He and I hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared skepticism and Ethan's occasional obliviousness. Ethan laid out the plan. We'd fly into Thunder Bay, drive north to a small town called Wabakimi, then hike into the wilderness with local guides who'd take us to an area where there'd been reported sightings over the past 2 years. Missing hikers, strange sounds, livestock disappearing from farms near the forest edge. The usual catalogue of weird that could be explained by bears, wolves, or people getting lost. We'd set up a base camp, document the location, interview any locals willing to talk, and spend 2 weeks filming in the area. If we found evidence of anything unusual, great. If not, we'd still have enough footage for a documentary about the folklore and the landscape. It sounded reasonable. It sounded safe. It sounded like the kind of project that would result in some nice scenery shots, a few interviews with old-timers telling spooky stories, and absolutely nothing supernatural. That was fine with me. I needed the money, and I was looking forward to 2 weeks in the woods without cell service. The thing nobody said out loud, but everyone understood, was that we weren't really going to observe. We were going to provoke. Ethan wanted footage of something, and if that something didn't show up on its own, he was prepared to do whatever it took to make it appear. He'd brought audio equipment to broadcast animal distress calls. He'd brought scent lures used for bear hunting. He'd brought drones with thermal cameras to fly patterns over the forest at night. We weren't scientists conducting a careful study. We were filmmakers trying to create a moment. We weren't looking for proof. We were looking for footage. And that distinction, as small as it seems, made all the difference. We flew into Thunder Bay on November 3rd, picked up 2 rented trucks loaded with gear, and drove north for 6 hours on progressively worse roads until we reached Wabakimi. The town was barely a town, just a collection of houses, a general store, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The population sign said 237, but I counted maybe 15 people during the entire time we were there. Our local guides were 2 brothers, James and Robert Maristy, who ran hunting and fishing expeditions during the warmer months. They were polite but not particularly warm, and they made it very clear that they thought we were idiots. James especially seemed annoyed by the whole arrangement. He told us straight out that the area we wanted to go to was considered off-limits by most of the local indigenous community, that there were stories about that part of the forest going back generations, and that people who went in there sometimes didn't come back the same. Ethan, of course, took this as confirmation that we were on the right track. He practically glowed with excitement, asking James detailed questions about the stories, about the disappearances, about anything he could use for the documentary. James answered in monosyllables, clearly regretting taking Ethan's money. We spent one night in Wabakimi, sleeping in a small motel that smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. Tom and I went to the general store to stock up on supplies, and the woman behind the counter, an older Cree woman named Margaret, asked us what we were doing in town. When we told her, her expression changed. Not scared, exactly, but something close to it. Disappointed, maybe. Like we were children who just announced we were going to play in traffic. She said something I didn't understand at first: the hungry don't like to be looked at. Then she refused to elaborate, just rang up our supplies in silence and watched us leave. We hiked into the forest the next morning. It took most of the day to reach the area James and Robert had scouted for us, a relatively flat section about 15 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by dense spruce and pine forest. The snow was already a foot deep in most places, deeper in the drifts, and the temperature was hovering around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, but not unbearable with the right gear. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet forest, but the oppressive silence of a place where nothing lived. No birds. No squirrels. No signs of deer or rabbits or any of the wildlife you'd normally expect. Just trees and snow and a sky that was already starting to darken even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. Mark commented on it immediately. He'd spent enough time in wilderness areas to know what normal looked like, and this wasn't it. Too quiet. Too empty. The forest felt abandoned, like every animal with enough sense had left and we were the only ones stupid enough to stay. We set up camp in a clearing, 4 tents arranged in a rough circle around a central fire pit. James and Robert helped us get everything squared away, gave us a satellite phone with instructions to call if we needed an emergency extraction, and then left. They said they'd be back in 2 weeks. The look on James's face suggested he wasn't entirely sure we'd still be there when they returned. That first night was uneventful. We ate dinner around the fire, Ethan outlined the filming schedule for the next day, and Tom made jokes about bear attacks to lighten the mood. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, hitting somewhere around 0 degrees, and we all retreated to our tents by 8 p.m. I fell asleep listening to the wind moving through the trees, a constant low whistle that sounded almost like breathing. I woke up around 2 in the morning, though I couldn't say what woke me. The wind had stopped. The forest was completely silent. Not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to carry properly, like the air was too thick to transmit sound. I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the roof of my tent, trying to figure out what felt wrong. Then I heard the footsteps. Something was walking around the perimeter of our camp, moving slowly, deliberately. The steps were too heavy for a person, too measured for an animal. They circled us once, twice, 3 times. I wanted to look outside, but something instinctive kept me frozen in place. Some part of my brain that was older than civilization was screaming at me not to draw attention to myself. The footsteps stopped directly outside my tent. I could hear breathing now, a wet, labored sound like someone with fluid in their lungs. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a long, low exhalation that turned into something between a sigh and a growl. It was the sound of something that had once been human but wasn't anymore. Then it moved on. The footsteps resumed, circling the camp one more time before fading into the distance. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I found Mark already up, drinking coffee by the fire. He looked at me and I looked at him, and we both knew we'd heard the same thing. Neither of us said anything. Ethan was energized at breakfast, asking if anyone had heard anything unusual. Lena mentioned hearing sounds like an animal moving around camp. Tom said he'd slept through the whole night. Mark and I exchanged glances but stayed quiet. Looking back, that was probably our first real mistake. If we'd compared notes then, if we'd admitted what we heard, maybe we would have packed up and left. Instead, we told ourselves it was probably a bear or a moose, and we got ready for our first full day of filming. We spent that day setting up camera positions, recording ambient sound, and having Ethan do several takes of his introductory narration. Everything felt normal during daylight. The oppressive silence was still there, but it was easier to rationalize in the sun. Just a quiet forest. Nothing strange about that. We found the first tracks around noon. They were in the snow about 100 yards from camp, heading deeper into the forest. At first glance, they looked like bare human footprints, which was impossible given the temperature. But as we examined them more closely, the proportions were wrong. Too long, too narrow, with the toes splayed out in a way that didn't match human anatomy. There were 6 prints visible before they disappeared into an area where the wind had blown the snow away. Mark took photographs. Lena measured them, her expression thoughtful. Tom filmed everything. Ethan was practically vibrating with excitement, already talking about how this would play in the documentary. I just stared at those prints and felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. We followed the tracks as far as we could, but they didn't lead anywhere. They just stopped in the middle of a clearing, like whatever made them had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. At the time, we called it atmosphere. We told ourselves it was probably some kind of prank, locals messing with the documentary crew. That was mistake number 2. The second night was worse. We all heard it this time. Something walking around the camp, but the footsteps weren't consistent. Sometimes they sounded heavy. Sometimes they sounded light. Sometimes they seemed to come from multiple directions at once. And then there were the voices. It started with Tom's voice calling my name from somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight. Except Tom was sitting right next to me, looking as confused as I felt. Then it was Ethan's voice, shouting for help from the direction of the forest. But Ethan was on the other side of the fire, frozen in place. The voices continued for hours, cycling through all of us, sometimes imitating perfectly, sometimes getting little details wrong, like the pitch was slightly off or the cadence didn't quite match. None of us slept that night. We sat around the fire, weapons ready, though I don't think any of us really believed guns would help. As the sun started to rise, the voices finally stopped. In the growing light, we found more tracks circling our camp. They'd been there all night, walking around us in loops that grew progressively tighter, getting closer each time. That was the night we realized something was counting us. And whatever it was, it had decided we were worth paying attention to. The third day started with Tom missing. We woke up at dawn and his tent was empty. His sleeping bag was still warm, his boots were still by the entrance, and the zipper on his tent was open from the inside. He'd walked out into the snow in his socks, in sub-freezing temperatures, and just disappeared. Mark and Ethan immediately organized a search pattern while Lena tried to reach James and Robert on the satellite phone. No signal. We'd had a clear connection when they left, but now there was nothing but static. Mark suggested it might be solar activity interfering with the satellite, but none of us really believed that. We found Tom 3 hours later, about a quarter mile from camp, standing barefoot in the snow in a small clearing. He was alive, which was the first miracle. His feet should have been frozen solid, but they were just cold, like he'd been standing there for minutes instead of hours. He was staring at the trees, completely motionless, and he didn't react when we called his name. We had to physically grab him to get his attention. When he finally looked at us, his eyes were wrong. Not obviously wrong, but wrong in a way I couldn't quite define. Like he was looking through us instead of at us. Mark wrapped him in a thermal blanket and we half-carried him back to camp. He didn't speak the entire way. It took another hour before Tom could form coherent sentences. He said he'd woken up hungry, despite eating a full dinner the night before. The hunger was overwhelming, consuming every other thought. He'd gotten up to check if there was any food left by the fire, and then he was in the clearing with no memory of walking there. He remembered standing in the snow, feeling nothing but that vast, endless hunger, and hearing something whisper his name. Not from any particular direction. From everywhere at once. "It knows my name," he said, and the way he said it made it clear he didn't just mean the words. He meant it knew him. Understood him. Had looked inside him and catalogued everything that made him Tom Pacheco, and now that knowledge belonged to something else. Ethan wanted to evacuate immediately. Mark agreed. Lena was already packing. I was about to join them when I noticed something. The forest had changed. Not in any obvious way, but in a fundamental one. The trees looked the same, the snow looked the same, but the spaces between them were different. The shadows fell at wrong angles. The distances didn't quite match what they should be. I pointed this out to Mark, who pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily in circles, refusing to settle on any direction. He tried his GPS unit next. According to the device, we were 50 miles from our actual location, in the middle of a lake. He reset it, tried again. Same result. His backup GPS showed us in a different impossible location. The paths we'd marked when we arrived, the small orange ribbons tied to trees to help us navigate, were gone. Not torn down. Just gone, like they'd never existed. We'd been careful about marking our trail, paranoid about getting lost, but now there was no trail. We were standing in a forest that looked almost exactly like the one we'd entered, but wasn't. Like someone had made a copy that was 99% accurate and deliberately got the remaining 1% wrong just to see if we'd notice. That's when the hunger hit all of us. Not normal hunger, not the kind that comes from skipping a meal. This was immediate and overwhelming, a yawning emptiness that felt less like needing food and more like needing to consume. I'd eaten breakfast 2 hours earlier, but my stomach felt like I hadn't eaten in days. Looking around, I could see the others feeling it too. Tom's expression had gone glassy again. Lena was gripping her pack straps so hard her knuckles were white. Mark's jaw was clenched. Ethan looked on the verge of panic. We rationed what food we had left, eating just enough to take the edge off without depleting our supplies. It didn't help. 20 minutes later, the hunger was back, just as intense as before. It was like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. No matter how much we ate, we were still empty. Lena pulled me aside while the others were trying to figure out a way to navigate without instruments. Her voice was low, urgent. "We need to stop trying to leave," she said. I stared at her. What? The forest doesn't want us to leave yet. The more we try, the worse it's going to get. That's how this works. How what works? What are you talking about? She looked at me like I was being deliberately obtuse. The Wendigo. We invited it. We came into its territory with cameras and lights and the express intention of proving it existed. We got its attention. And now it's deciding what to do with us. That's insane. There's no such thing as. Look around, she interrupted. The forest changed. The compass doesn't work. We're all starving despite eating. Tom walked barefoot into the snow and survived. At what point does skepticism become denial? I didn't have an answer. Because she was right. Every rational explanation had already failed. We were experiencing something that couldn't exist, which meant either I was losing my mind or the world was bigger and stranger than I'd wanted to believe. Neither option was comforting. We decided to stay put and wait for dawn. Maybe in daylight, things would make more sense. Maybe the satellite phone would work. Maybe we'd wake up and discover this was all some weird shared hallucination brought on by bad food or carbon monoxide from the camp stove. We took turns on watch, keeping the fire going, trying not to think about how hungry we were. I had the 2 to 4 a.m. shift. Mark woke me up, said everything was quiet, and stumbled off to his tent. I sat by the fire, feeding it logs, watching the darkness between the trees. The cold was intense enough that I could feel it trying to leach the heat from my body even through my winter gear. My breath came out in clouds so thick they were almost solid. That's when I saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, but in pieces. A shape moving between the trees, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. It was maybe 60 yards away, just at the edge where the firelight faded into darkness. At first, I thought it was a tree, a dead spruce stripped of its branches. But then it moved. The movement was wrong. It didn't walk so much as unfold, like a puppet being manipulated by someone who didn't quite understand how joints worked. One moment it was in one place, the next it was 10 feet to the left, without any visible transition between the two positions. It was so tall that its head was level with the lower branches of the surrounding trees, which would make it at least 12 or 13 feet. Its body was skeletal, ribs visible even from this distance, skin pulled tight over bones that seemed too long and too numerous. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with fingers that looked like they had too many joints. I couldn't see its face. There was a head, or something head-shaped, but the details wouldn't resolve properly. Every time I tried to focus on it, my eyes would slide away, like my brain was refusing to process the information. I could see antlers, or something like antlers, branching up from the skull. I could see what might have been eyes, or might have been empty sockets. I could see something that might have been a mouth, stretched too wide, too full of teeth. It stood there, watching me. I sat by the fire, watching it. Neither of us moved. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I wanted to scream, to wake the others, to grab a weapon, to run. I did none of those things. Some instinct kept me perfectly still, the same instinct that keeps prey animals frozen when a predator is near. After what felt like hours but was probably only a minute, it moved again. This time away from camp, melting back into the forest with that same unnatural motion. It was there, and then it wasn't, and I was left wondering if I'd seen anything at all. When Mark came to relieve me at 4, he took one look at my face and asked if something had happened. I told him I'd seen it. I described what I'd seen, expecting him to tell me I was seeing things, that it was shadows and exhaustion and fear. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Good. At least now we know. It's real. It's here. And we need to figure out what it wants." He paused, then added, "And we need to figure it out fast, because I don't think it's done with us yet." That's when belief stopped being optional. I'd spent 3 days trying to rationalize what was happening, trying to find logical explanations for impossible things. But you can't rationalize something that's standing 60 yards away, watching you with eyes that see things human eyes were never meant to see. The Wendigo was real. It was here. And we were in serious trouble. Morning brought no relief. If anything, daylight made things worse because we could see clearly just how wrong everything had become. The camp looked the same, but the forest around it had definitely changed. Trees that had been a certain distance away were now closer. Others had moved farther. The clearing we'd chosen for our camp was smaller than it had been, like the forest was slowly closing in around us. We gathered around the fire for a meeting, though calling it a meeting makes it sound more organized than it was. Really, it was 5 terrified people trying to figure out how to survive something that shouldn't exist. Ethan was advocating for making a run for it, just picking a direction and walking until we found the road or a settlement or anything human. Mark pointed out that we had no idea which direction to go and that blind panic in the wilderness was a good way to end up dead. Tom hadn't said much since we'd found him in the clearing, just sat and stared at the fire with that distant expression. Lena was the only one who seemed calm, which worried me more than anything else. "We need to stop thinking of this as a survival situation," she said. "This isn't about finding our way out or waiting for rescue. This is about the fact that we invited something's attention and now we need to convince it we're not interesting anymore." Ethan laughed, but it was a broken sound. "Invited? We didn't invite anything. We just came to film." "We came to hunt," Lena corrected. "That's what Ethan sold this as, right? Hunting the Wendigo. Proving it was real. We brought equipment to lure it out, to force an encounter. In the framework of its world, we declared ourselves hunters. And now it's showing us what being hunted feels like. So what do we do?" I asked. Lena was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. The traditional solution is appeasement. What does that mean? Mark asked. It means offering it something. Acknowledgement. Respect. Sometimes. She trailed off. Sometimes what? Ethan demanded. Sometimes a sacrifice. The silence that followed was profound. We all sat there, processing what she just said, each of us probably running through the same horrible calculations. 5 people. One way out. Basic arithmetic that led to unthinkable conclusions. No, Mark said firmly. Absolutely not. We're not even discussing that. I'm not suggesting it, Lena said quickly. I'm telling you what the stories say. I'm telling you what's worked in the past. But there are other ways. The Wendigo grows with fear and hunger. The more afraid you are, the more it feeds. The more you give in to desperation, the stronger it becomes. So maybe the answer is the opposite. The opposite of fear? Tom spoke for the first time that morning. You want us to just not be scared? While that thing is out there? Not the opposite of fear, Lena said. The opposite of hunting. We came here as predators. We need to leave as something else. We need to show it we're not a threat. That we're not challenging it. That we acknowledge it's the dominant force here and we're just trying to leave. It sounded like magical thinking, like wishful fantasy that had no basis in reality. But then again, we were being hunted by a creature that shouldn't exist in a forest that had changed its geography overnight. Maybe magical thinking was exactly what the situation called for. We spent that day doing the opposite of what we'd planned. We took down the camera equipment. We destroyed the audio lures. We packed up all the technology and buried it in the snow. We took every piece of evidence we'd gathered, every recording, every photograph, and we erased it. It felt like surrender. It felt like admitting defeat. It also felt like the first sensible thing we'd done since arriving. The hunger was constant now, a background sensation that never went away. We ate our remaining food supplies but it didn't help. The emptiness was psychological as much as physical, a sense that something vital had been carved out of us and we'd never be whole again. Tom was getting worse. He'd stopped eating entirely, claiming he couldn't taste anything anymore, that food just felt like ash in his mouth. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor and his eyes had a glassy quality that reminded me of someone with a high fever. That night, the voices came back. But this time they weren't imitating us. They were speaking words none of us understood, a language that sounded human but wasn't any language I'd ever heard. It rose and fell in a rhythm that felt almost like a song, echoing through the forest from no fixed direction. The words made my teeth ache and left a metallic taste in my mouth. Mark had his rifle across his lap, though I don't think he had any illusion that bullets would help. Ethan was praying, which surprised me because he'd never mentioned being religious. Lena had her eyes closed, maybe meditating, maybe just trying to block everything out. Tom had wandered to the edge of the firelight and was staring into the darkness, swaying slightly. I was about to get up and pull him back when he said, very clearly, "It wants to talk to us." "Tom, get away from there," Mark said. "It wants to make a deal." "Tom, right now, come back to the fire." Tom turned to look at us. In the firelight, his face looked hollowed out, like something had eaten away at him from the inside. "It says it will let us go. It says it will show us the way home. It just wants one thing." "What does it want?" Ethan asked, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. He was ready to negotiate. We all were, if we were being honest. Tom smiled, and it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. "It wants to know which one of us stays." The fire seemed to dim. The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see frost forming on our gear in real time. The voices in the forest stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. We all knew what he meant. The Wendigo wanted a trade. 4 lives for 1. A bargain that was no bargain at all. Nobody's staying, Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's not a negotiation, Tom said softly. It's a statement of fact. One way or another, one of us isn't leaving this forest. The only question is whether we choose or whether it chooses for us. Lena was shaking her head. Don't listen to him. This is exactly what it wants. It wants us to turn on each other. It wants us to do its work. That's part of the hunger, part of how it transforms people. You start making calculations. You start seeing the people around you as resources or obstacles. That's the beginning of becoming what it is. So what do we do? I asked. We can't fight it. We can't run from it. We apparently can't negotiate with it. What option does that leave? We wait, Lena said. We stay together. We don't give in to the fear or the hunger or the paranoia. We show it that we're still human. That we haven't broken yet. It sounded good. It sounded noble. It also sounded like a strategy that would slowly kill us. We had maybe 2 days of food left. The temperature was dropping every night. The satellite phone was still dead. Nobody was coming to rescue us. James and Robert weren't due back for another 10 days. We could last maybe 4 or 5 more days before hypothermia or starvation or simple exhaustion killed us. Unless we did something first. I saw Ethan thinking it. I saw the calculation in his eyes as he looked at each of us, weighing options, assessing who was weakest, who would be missed least. I saw Mark notice Ethan noticing, and I saw him shift slightly so his rifle was more accessible. I saw Lena watching all of us with a kind of sad resignation, like she'd known from the beginning that this was where we'd end up. And I saw Tom, still standing at the edge of the firelight, smiling that horrible smile, already more of it than us. Tom, I said carefully. Come sit by the fire. He didn't move. It's so hungry. Have you ever felt hunger like this? It's not just wanting food. It's wanting everything. It's wanting to consume the whole world and still have room for more. It's the best feeling I've ever had. Mark stood up, rifle in hand. Tom, you need to sit down right now. Or what? You'll shoot me? Tom laughed. That would solve a problem, wouldn't it? One less person to feed. One less mouth taking resources. You've thought about it. I can see it in your face. You've thought about which one of us you'd sacrifice if you had to. Shut up, Mark said. Ethan's thought about it too. He's probably got a whole plan worked out. Who's most useful, who's expendable. That's how leaders think, right? Utilitarian calculus. The greatest good for the greatest number. And I'm definitely not the greatest good anymore. Tom, please. Lena's voice was pleading. Fight it. Whatever it's doing to you, fight it. Tom finally looked at her, and for just a moment, I saw the real Tom underneath, terrified and desperate and trapped inside his own head. I can't, he whispered. It's inside me now. It's been inside me since that first night, getting stronger every day. And the worst part is, I don't want to fight it anymore. The hunger makes everything so simple. So clear. Then he turned and walked into the darkness. Just stepped beyond the firelight and was gone, swallowed by the forest like he'd never existed. Mark started to follow, but Lena grabbed his arm. Let him go, she said. We can't just. We can't save him. He made his choice. Maybe it was even the right choice. Maybe that's what it wanted all along. One of us to go willingly. Her voice cracked. Maybe that's enough to satisfy it. We sat around the fire for the rest of the night, the 4 of us that remained, not talking, barely moving. Waiting to see if Tom's sacrifice would be enough. Waiting to see if we'd wake up in the morning back in the normal world where forests stayed where you left them and hunger was just a biological need instead of a spiritual corruption. The voices started again just before dawn, but this time they were different. Higher pitched. More human. It took me several minutes to realize they were screaming. Tom was screaming, somewhere out there in the darkness, screaming words that might have been please or stop or help. The screaming went on for a long time. Long enough that I found myself hoping it would end, just so I wouldn't have to hear it anymore. Long enough that when it finally did stop, the silence was almost worse. When the sun came up, we found tracks leading away from camp. Tom's boots in the snow, walking in a straight line toward the deeper forest. And beside them, those other prints. The long, narrow, too many jointed prints of something that walked on two legs but wasn't human. They walked parallel for maybe 100 yards, Tom's print steady and purposeful, like he was going somewhere he wanted to be. Then Tom's print stopped. Just stopped, mid-stride, like he'd been erased from existence. The other prints continued for another 10 feet, and then they stopped too. In the snow between where both sets of prints ended, there was a single splash of red. Not a lot. Just enough to confirm what we already knew. Tom was gone. And we were still here. And the forest was still wrong. His sacrifice, willing or not, hadn't been enough. The fourth day blurred into the fifth, and the fifth blurred into something that might have been the sixth or might have been the 10th for all I could tell. Time stopped working correctly. We'd sleep for what felt like hours and wake up to find only minutes had passed. Or we'd sit by the fire for what seemed like a few minutes and discover half a day had gone by. The sun moved across the sky at irregular intervals, sometimes racing, sometimes barely crawling. Night came when it felt like coming, lasted as long as it wanted, then released us back into a twilight that might have been dawn or dusk or something in between. The hunger was our entire world now. We'd stopped eating because food no longer helped. Mark tried to force down some granola bars and immediately vomited them back up. Ethan became obsessed with rationing our supplies, even though we all knew the supplies were meaningless. We weren't dying of starvation. We were dying of something that starvation was just a symptom of. Lena was the one who finally said what we were all thinking. We need to stop running. Stop trying to escape. Stop fighting. That's what it feeds on. Our desperation. Our will to survive. Every time we try to live, we make it stronger. So what? Ethan's voice was hoarse. He'd aged 10 years in less than a week. We just give up. Lay down and die. We stop hunting, she said. We stopped hunting it, but we're still hunting a way out. Still hunting for survival. We're still predators in our thinking. We need to become nothing. No threat. No challenge. No interest at all. That's insane, Mark said, but he said it without heat. We were past the point of judging what was sane. The Wendigo is about hunger, Lena continued. Endless, consuming hunger. It exists in a state of permanent want. So what's the opposite of want? Not satisfaction. You can't satisfy it. The opposite of want is indifference. Acceptance. Letting go. I understood what she was saying, even if I didn't want to. We needed to stop caring whether we lived or died. Stop fighting for survival. The moment we stopped wanting to escape, we'd stop being interesting. We'd stop being prey worth stalking. We'd become just another part of the forest, and maybe then it would let us go. It sounded like suicide dressed up in philosophical language. It probably was. But we were out of other options. We spent that night sitting around the fire, not talking about plans or strategies or what we'd do in the morning. We talked about other things. Memories. Stupid jokes. Mark told a story about his daughter's 5th birthday party. Ethan talked about his first startup, how it had failed spectacularly and taught him everything he needed to know. Lena recited a poem in Cree that her grandmother had taught her, something about the winter and the patience of ice. I talked about my sister, about how we'd grown apart over the years and how I'd kept meaning to call her and never did. We talked about our lives like we were already dead. Like we were ghosts sitting around a fire, sharing the stories of the people we used to be. And somewhere during that night, something changed. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on us for days lifted slightly. The hunger didn't go away, but it became manageable, just another sensation rather than an all-consuming need. The forest felt less hostile, more indifferent, like it had been watching us intensely and had now decided we weren't worth the attention anymore. When dawn came, it came normally. The sun rose in the east like it was supposed to, moved across the sky at the right speed, and we could track its movement in a way that made sense. Mark checked his compass. The needle pointed north and stayed there. His GPS showed us exactly where we'd set up camp 6 days earlier. The orange ribbons we'd tied to trees as trail markers were back, hanging exactly where we'd left them, as if they'd never disappeared. The path that led back to where James and Robert would pick us up was visible again, clear and obvious in the snow. We could leave. We were being allowed to leave. Not because we'd won or outsmarted anything, but because we'd finally stopped playing the game. We packed up our camp in silence. We left behind almost everything. The tents. The equipment. Most of our supplies. We took only what we could carry easily, and even that felt like too much, like we were being greedy by taking anything at all. Mark left his rifle leaning against a tree. Ethan left his cameras and recording equipment in a pile by the dead fire. Lena performed a short ceremony I didn't understand, whispering words to the forest in a language I couldn't follow, leaving an offering of tobacco wrapped in red cloth. I left Tom's notebook, the one where he'd been keeping notes about the expedition. It seemed wrong to take it, like we'd be stealing something that belonged to the forest now. We walked out on the 6th day, following the path that hadn't been there yesterday. The forest watched us leave. I could feel its attention like a physical weight, not hostile anymore but not friendly either. Just aware. Observing. Taking note of the humans who'd entered its territory with arrogance and were leaving with humility. The walk should have taken most of a day, but we emerged from the tree lean after what felt like only an hour or two, finding ourselves on the logging road exactly where we'd left the trucks. They were still there, covered in snow, batteries dead, but there. Real and solid and belonging to the world we understood. James and Robert found us 3 hours later. They'd come early, something about a feeling they should check on us. They took one look at us and didn't ask questions. They gave us blankets and hot coffee and drove us back to Wabakimi in silence. The coffee tasted like nothing. Everything tasted like nothing. That particular symptom would last for months. The official story was simple. Documentary crew gets lost in the wilderness during an early cold snap. One member of the party, Tom Pacheco, separates from the group during a disorienting whiteout and is never recovered. The other 4 members survive with mild hypothermia and acute stress reactions. Search and Rescue conducts a 3-day ground search but finds no trace of the missing person. Case remains open but inactive. Presumed dead due to exposure. The unofficial story was that we'd experienced a severe psychological break brought on by isolation, cold, and insufficient food. That we'd hallucinated most of what we remembered. That Tom had wandered off in a state of confusion and we'd been too impaired to help him. That everything we thought we'd experienced was just the brain doing what brains do when they're under extreme stress, creating narratives to explain sensory input that doesn't make sense. I wanted to believe the unofficial story. It would have been easier. Cleaner. It would have meant the world still worked the way I thought it did. But I couldn't make myself believe it, because of what happened after. The footage we'd shot, everything we'd filmed during those first few days, was corrupted. Not just corrupted, but wrong. When Ethan tried to review it weeks later, after multiple data recovery attempts, the videos showed things we didn't remember filming. Shots of the forest at night that none of us recalled taking. Audio recordings of conversations we'd never had. And in the background of every single frame, if you looked carefully enough, you could see it. A shape. Too tall, too thin, always just at the edge of the visible frame, watching us. Ethan destroyed all of it. Took the hard drives out to a firing range and shot them until they were powder. Paid a premium to have the wreckage incinerated. He didn't want any record to exist. He didn't want anyone else to get curious and go looking for what we'd found. The documentary was never made. He paid back his investors out of pocket and never worked on another cryptid project. Last I heard, he'd sold his house and moved to Phoenix, as far from deep forest as he could get. Mark went back to Alaska, but he quit leading wilderness tours. He took a job as a safety consultant for oil companies, work that kept him in offices and on drilling platforms, places that were aggressively industrial and unnatural. He told me once, during one of our infrequent phone calls, that he couldn't stand forests anymore. That any time he saw deep woods, he felt like something was looking back. Lena finished her anthropology degree but switched her focus from folklore to modern urban cultural studies. She moved to Toronto and teaches at York University now. She doesn't talk about what happened. She won't talk about it. I tried once, a few years ago, and she hung up on me. I didn't call again. I understand. Some things are better left unexamined. As for me, I stopped doing documentary work. I write copy for corporate websites now, boring work that pays the bills and requires no creativity or curiosity or desire to uncover hidden truths. I live in San Francisco, in an apartment on the 8th floor where I can see nothing but city in every direction. I haven't been camping since 2018. I probably never will again. But there are still effects. Symptoms. Reminders that what happened wasn't just psychological trauma or shared delusion. I still feel hungry in winter. Even when I've eaten. Even when I'm full to the point of discomfort, the moment the temperature drops and the days get short, the hunger comes back. Not as intense as it was in the forest, but always present, always there. A background sensation of emptiness that nothing can fill. I dream about the forest sometimes. In the dreams, I'm walking through snow, following tracks that lead deeper into the trees. I never see what made the tracks, but I can hear it walking ahead of me, branches cracking, that wet clicking sound of joints moving in ways joints shouldn't move. In the dreams, I'm always aware that I should turn back, that following those tracks is a terrible idea, but I keep walking anyway, drawn forward by a curiosity I can't control. I always wake up before I catch up to whatever I'm following. I'm grateful for that. The official search for Tom was called off after 6 weeks. His family held a memorial service in March. I attended, sat in the back, and didn't tell them what really happened. What was I supposed to say? That their son had walked willingly into the darkness to feed something that shouldn't exist? That he'd smiled while doing it? That his sacrifice might have saved the rest of us but probably just delayed the inevitable? They deserved better than the truth. Sometimes I wonder if we really got away or if we're still there, still sitting around that fire, still waiting for dawn to come. Sometimes I wonder if I actually died in those woods and everything since has been a dream, my consciousness running through scenarios while my frozen body rests in the snow beside Tom's. Sometimes I wonder if the Wendigo let us go because it knew we'd carry it with us, that we'd spread the hunger and the cold wherever we went, making us vectors for something we didn't understand. But mostly I wonder about Tom. What he's doing out there. Whether he's still Tom at all or if he became something else, something that walks on 2 legs through winter forests, growing taller and thinner and hungrier with each passing year. Whether he remembers us. Whether he's grateful or regretful or so far beyond human emotion that those words don't mean anything anymore. I received a package 3 years ago. No return address, postmarked from Thunder Bay. Inside was Tom's notebook, the one I'd left by the campfire. The pages were blank except for the last one, where someone had written in handwriting that might have been Tom's but also might not have been. "Thank you for the introduction." I burned it immediately, but I still remember the words. I'll always remember the words. There are places in this world where the old rules still apply. Places where folklore isn't metaphor but memory, where stories aren't entertainment but warnings, where the line between the human world and whatever else exists isn't as solid as we'd like to believe. The forests of northern Ontario are one of those places. There are others. You probably live near one. You might even have visited one without knowing it. Here's what I learned from my time hunting the Wendigo: it doesn't matter if you believe in it. Belief is optional. The Wendigo exists whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you think it's real or just a story told to frighten children. It's there in the deep woods, in the winter darkness, in the hunger that goes beyond hunger, in the moment when survival instinct overrides morality and you realize you're capable of things you never thought possible. We went into that forest as hunters, with cameras and lights and the arrogant certainty that we could document something ancient and walk away unchanged. We learned the hard way that some things don't want to be documented. Some things don't want to be understood. Some things just want to be left alone, and when you refuse to leave them alone, they teach you lessons you'll never forget. Tom is still in those woods. Part of them now. Maybe all of them. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind sounds almost like voices, I think I can hear him calling my name. Not asking for help. Not seeking rescue. Just reminding me that he's still there. Still hungry. Still waiting. If you ever find yourself thinking about hunting a Wendigo, about going into those forests with cameras and equipment and the intention of proving something ancient and terrible is real, I want you to remember this story. Remember what happened to 5 people who thought they were clever enough, prepared enough, modern enough to challenge a legend. Remember that the Wendigo doesn't hunt you the way you hunt it. It doesn't need to. It just has to wait for you to make the first mistake, the first challenge, the first provocation. And then it responds. Not with anger or malice, but with something far worse. With attention. And once you have its attention, once it starts to notice you, once it begins to count you among the things it's aware of in its territory, you're already lost. You just don't know it yet. The question isn't whether you'll escape. The question is what you'll become before you do. We got out. We survived. But I'm not sure we escaped. Not really. Because I still feel it sometimes, that presence in the dark. I still wake up feeling watched. I still hear footsteps that don't match anything human. And I still wonder, on the worst nights, whether the thing that left those woods 5 years ago was really me or something that learned to wear my face and imitate my voice and pretend to be human well enough that nobody has noticed yet. The Wendigo is patient. It's been hunting longer than you've been human. Longer than your species has been human. And it's still hungry. Always hungry. Forever hungry. So if you ever think about hunting a Wendigo, remember this: you're not hunting it. You're introducing yourself. And it has a very, very long memory. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is everything I remember from January 2018, the 6 days I spent in the forests of northern Ontario, and the creature that lives there still. I hope you never need to remember it. But if you do, I hope it helps. And if it doesn't, I'm sorry. We were sorry too.